What's up, guys? We're going to take a look at the Bitcoin price gap and strictly looking at the CME futures, Bitcoin futures. Well, that's where these gaps are derived from, and a lot of people are talking about them. And so there's a lot of eyes looking at this level. So I thought it would be good a video to go over gaps, why they happen, and how price reacts to them, and how trading goes around those levels. Okay, so we'll dive into that in this video.
Trade Genius.
Guys, really quickly, we do have our back to school specials running. We have a couple different bundles if you're interested in the stock ETF side of things or the crypto and the binary option side of things, which really this is a great environment for that stuff right now. A lot of volatility, so we're able to take advantage of that. So check that out. We also have some other specials if you're interested in the more educational parts of this. So these are for a year annual, so 12 months of access. And it's, I mean, for the amount of information you get every day, that's an extremely good deal. I don't think you'll be hard pressed to find a better value out there for this, what we give you. All right, let's dive into the chart. So this is the CME futures. This is a 4-hour chart. I highlighted the gap that's currently being approached with the price of Bitcoin. This is right now I'm recording this on Saturday, September 5th, 2020. And this gap here was tested on Friday during the day, got a quick dip down, but we did not close the gap. Closing the gap would mean we'd have to close through this rectangle that I have drawn here, down to approximately 96.70, 96.60 or so. And that hasn't happened. So it's a little fishy because I like to see if this came down and closed that gap and bounced, then I would say mission accomplished. That's very bullish. The fact that we didn't do that and we came down, and that tells me there's unfinished business down here. Now, I think because of the fact that we have a relationship with S&P 500 currently as a short-term correlation in place, I think this is going to see more downside. And I actually think this gap's going to close. There's too many people looking at this gap for this thing to just be a real clean bounce and then off we go. Usually when the gaps close, they close really quickly. There's a quick bounce and it's done. Meandering around or above a gap close is bearish to me. And I think that's a scenario that we have. We are not up at this level. Again, this chart stops plotting at 5 p.m. on Friday evening because they're futures and the CME futures are closed over the weekend. That's why we have price gaps on this chart. That's why you hear about price gaps with the price of Bitcoin. It's not about the spot price. Spot price trades 24/7. This is the futures. So this gap came from the weekend, back from July 24th to July 26th. Okay, there was a gap in the price there. And we haven't looked back since that time. So, a few months have passed, right? Now, gaps don't have to fill. Okay, there's no law that says that they have to fill. They just tend to fill. And the reason for that is because once price starts to get back into the striking distance of a gap, that's where everybody and the algos start to look for a target. Now, because we've gotten so close and we did not fill it, I think we're going to not only fill it, but I think we're going to overthrow it. And we're also, because we're tied to the stock market, I don't think the stock market's done correcting. We've had quite the run up. And I think that the bulls that have been buying up this market for a lot of different reasons, and that's another video to discuss why we've had such a big rise in the market. But I think that dynamic has shifted a little bit here. So I think we are going to see a little more correction down, and that's going to bring the price of Bitcoin down. The other thing I wanted to point out was just structurally, you do have kind of a bearish top formation here in that we have a head and shoulders set up, which means that you just have this look of a right shoulder, a head, a left shoulder, a head formation, and then a right shoulder formation. And normally what that means is if you do decisively break the neckline, which is roughly this neckline that I drew here, then what happens is you take the measurement from the top of the head to the neckline, which is represented by this shaded area. That's that range. And then you take and you shift that range down to the neckline down. And interestingly enough, that puts you right around that gap close. So I think that this measured move in the head and shoulders breakdown is probably going to play out, fill that gap. But I don't think it's going to stop there because of the amount of room that is yet to go on the S&P 500 as far as being a corrective move down. And we'll go over that in the next video when we discuss more about the Bitcoin price action and levels to look for. So there's the gap. That's my take on it. We do have a smaller gap back here on the 4-hour chart. These I'm not a big fan of because this is the intraday chart or intraday gap. And what that means is the futures will close for an hour during the day from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern. And that effectively closes the daily bar on the futures and reopens the next daily bar on the futures. So that's where your daily bars stop and start. And at 6 p.m. Eastern, this created a little bit of a gap here, but this gap is extremely small and it doesn't show up on the daily chart. So the intraday gaps from that 5 to 6 p.m. period of where it doesn't trade because they've closed futures down, they're re-indexing or whatever, and then they reopen. I'm not a huge, unless that's a big gap, I'm not a real huge fan of that filling. I mean, obviously, if we get down in that area, you can obviously target that, and that isn't a bad place to target because that actually is a decent area of support and resistance on the chart. But it's not one of those, like this gap, we were definitely calling for it to fill. This gap, I really don't care if it fills or not. I don't think that's going to be a big deal if we leave that one behind because of the nature of that gap. Technicals look good. Obviously, we've dipped down and when you get this tight grouping down and that hook up and that cross up on the stochastic RSI, then that's usually pretty bullish. However, I think we're going to run into some trouble, and I think this isn't a bounce or runaway bounce. I think this is going to actually probe lower. So just bear that in mind. But I wanted to go over the gap mechanics, and just the expectations of this gap fill and what to expect. Another thing too is with regards to gaps having to fill, just one thing I will leave you with. If you notice, this gap was left behind back in August of 2019. So that's a long time to leave a gap unfilled. It didn't fill it until a year later, basically. So just keep that in mind when it comes to gaps. They don't always have to fill, or they can hold for a really long time. Okay, so just bear that in mind. But typically speaking, most of the time, the gaps, as long as there's just not a runaway move, a lot of times they're just going to end up filling. Okay, and especially when this price starts to probe back down. So do fully expect price to cross through the 96.70 level on the futures. Bitcoin spot's trading about $50 higher, so that'll take us north of 9,700. But I think the better spot probably will be where all of the point of control was for this price range here, this balance area, and that's more like 9,300. So I think that would be a good area to take a swing long. Whether that holds or not, I think has to do with the larger macroeconomic picture with the stock indices until Bitcoin decouples. Okay, so there's my take on the gap chart for Bitcoin. Next video, we're going to go over the actual price action and price levels to look for with Bitcoin as we correct back down. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Please hit like and subscribe. Really helps us out. I'll see you on the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.
Trade Genius.